Good morning. Thank you for joining us today with the CTE, Center for Teaching Excellence. We have an excellent webinar today, Setting Classroom Expectations and Creating a Sense of Belonging. Leanne Holly is joining me today. She's going to be helping to monitor the chat box and also to take attendance, keep up with people. I've also mentioned previously that this webinar is a required webinar for the FPLE Certificate of Completion. And you must sign in and attend the entire webinar to receive credit for it. I'll also mention the fact that we have a webinar that starts this afternoon at 1:15, and it also is a part of that certificate of completion. Today, we're going to be joined by two women who certainly are experts in their fields. Elisa Leggett, who's the Executive Director of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity and the Chair of the Behavioral Intervention Team. And Erin Kitchell will be with us. She is the Director of Academic Integrity for the Office of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity. I'll say a couple of things about them that I think are impressive. They have both taught University 101, so obviously they have a good bit of experience in the classroom, and they are, both of them, extremely dedicated to developing meaningful academic environments in the classrooms.
For many of you, this session was meant to be an in-person session for in-person classroom settings. And so in advance, we did a poll to ask what was most needed since we have made this transition during the pandemic. And in that poll, it was half and half. Many of you are still teaching hybrid courses. Many of you are online, and some of you are doing in-person still. So please know that most of this we're going to retain for in-person teaching because we are going to eventually return to in-person teaching, but we've added some key components of how to make that shift. So if you are feeling resistant about that shift, please know that you are being crowned during the session as a retention specialist. All of us are becoming retention specialists during this. We had always subscribe to the quote that's on your slide. This is a 40-year-old quote, and I think it is more important now than ever because we know that students who are online feel more isolated. We know that we lose them at a higher rate. And right now, the university has predicted that about 42% of our undergraduate registrations are going to be 100% online. So these students are going to be feeling very disconnected. And that nobody's really sure if they are participating or not. And so it is up to you, the people who are on this call, to be the people who are their connection to the university. So thank you so much for being a part of this, because I think that we all have to adopt our responsibility to our students even more vigorously than before. So I hope many of you have gurus in your studies, and these are some of the people that we're going to identify their work and how it applies to our classroom settings. So, of course, KOLB'S theory of experiential learning is critical, and that's a starting point to how we design our classrooms. Jay Howard has a fabulous book called Discussion in the College Classroom. He has a lot of research on classroom norms and participation that are important for us to know as we approach how we address our classes. Dan Friedman, who is a beloved UN01 programs director, teaches a lot about information and belongingness and how that contributes to the UN01 success. And then Flower Darby was the keynote for CTE's Ed Tech conference, and she has a book with James Lang called Small Teaching Online, Applying Learning Science in an Online Setting. And it is pretty serendipitous that CTE brought her before we even knew we would be switching. So thank you very much to the CTE. We'll be looking at her work specifically as an addition to in-person classroom options. So KOLB'S experiential learning theory, this is how we can design our entire course, and especially even day to day, what your day's plan is. So we start with the experience, and that's kind of the feeling component of this. How does a student get interested? How do we hook them from the beginning? Then have them maybe solve a problem. They reflect on how to do it. They reflect on kind of what the components of the problem might be. The conceptualization process is where you may teach them what are these new formats, what is the lecture component that helps them then solve the problem, and then they try that experiment again. So I think in a lot of the pedagogy literature, there are some famous examples about, in a physics course, if you have a glass dome with a canary on it on top of a scale, the first thing in the experience component, you ask, if this canary takes flight, how does that change the readout on the scale? Breaking students into groups to say, use what your preconceived notions are is to kind of predict what it would be. In many cases, they are not going to have the mass and force knowledge to solve it. Then we move into conceptualize. The instructor helps them connect what they had tested as kind of the hypothesis, and then they're shown what is working and what is not, and then they test that through their own experimentation process. That's something we can do by issuing a question or a problem in the beginning of class in any particular topic. So when we think about Kolb's experiential learning process, how we best learn informs how we best teach. So once we've got their curiosity primed, we can move on and make sure that they are kind of synthesizing their own ideas as you are teaching. We're going to move on to Jay Howard's credentials. He, as I said, does discussion in the college classroom, which is fantastic. And he is a noted sociologist. And one of the most important parts that he writes about is the concept of civil attention. So he points out that the classroom is a negotiated social setting. We are not stuck with civil attention. So what is civil attention? We have all done it and we have all seen it. So when there is just enough attention that you're letting the instructor know you're halfway there, so there's this eye contact, but there's still some gaze aversion so that the instructor does not call on you. This begins in the elementary school classroom, and it is amusing, but this happens all the time. When we think about our classroom settings or lectures that we have been to, we see this happen in the first 2 minutes. And so what we want to do in our classrooms is address this first day, talk about, and it's really kind of a funny concept because everybody is familiar with it. So when we look at civil attention, we're going to examine how that plays out in different classroom scenarios, but how do we disrupt this operative classroom norm? Beginning with on the first day, some steps. In my class, we openly discuss what the norm is in civil participation. We want to make sure our students are active participants and that they are engaged because we know that's where the learning happens. So here's a quote for us to ponder. The one doing the most work in the classroom is the one doing the most learning. So if you are the only one speaking in a lecture format, that format is in direct conflict with civil attention. The entire classroom can get away with civil attention if we're using a lecture format. So one of Jay's exact quotes that he uses, which I think is a nice kind of equalizer in a classroom, is that he lets students know if you're engaged in learning, you're gonna learn more. That's his job, that's his whole goal. And so he doesn't want to do it in a way where that classroom participation causes any embarrassment or causes increased anxiety in students. So he is committed to building trust in his classroom. How does he make sure that everybody feels like it's a learning environment that everybody can thrive in? So taking our civil attention and making sure that we disrupt it and let students know that if that begins to occur, that we're going to disrupt it even throughout the semester. So also on the first day, what would he not do? Obviously all of the talking, but he would give a quiz. How do you get students out of the civil attention kind of routine from the beginning? Think about your syllabus, and instead, nobody wants to hear any of us standing up there going, and the attendance policy is. Look at the questions that you think are most important for them to grasp, and then add some that, once again, pique their interest. So if you are looking at, okay, I need students to know what the attendance policy is because that's going to be critical in this online setting, also ask them, what are you most excited about learning about? Talk about the fact that, you know what, If you're curious about this, we can take that curiosity and explore it in different ways. So the other beautiful part about this that leads to Dan Friedman's belongingness components are the fact that we get students talking early and often. So if they are in a group, they're already building some of that trust. They're already feeling like they can talk in front of the group if they've met the other people. So these very small exercises are critical just in making sure that your classroom environment is more inviting. So Jay is an insatiable researcher, as most sociologists can be. So one of the most important studies that we've seen him do is how talkers and non-talkers view themselves in the classroom. So when we approach our classroom and how we address our students, it's important for us to recognize that students agree that yes, they got to pay attention and learn and ask for help, that they are active in the learning process, but they disagree that they would have to participate in discussion. So if we know that that is a reality for many of the students walking in, we've got to kind of change that perspective and let them know why, that it is to everyone's benefit in the classroom if everyone is engaged. In his research, what he found about why talkers talk, pretty basic. People have something to share, they need clarification, they think it will help their grade. Comfortable atmosphere and comfort and familiarity with classmates were key. We have to also believe that comfort with the instructor is a component of that. So how do we foster a classroom environment that invites participation? By helping students feel comfortable and that it's non-judgmental. Now, more importantly, what are the key reasons non-talkers don't talk? Once again, what I am modeling is exactly what you wouldn't do. We would stop if we were in person and let people kind of chat through what your suspicions were. But think about what your biggest fear is about why non-talkers don't talk. Yes, actually, shyness is one of the main reasons. However, a lot of people assume that students are disengaged. Yes, they're afraid to say something that makes them not look smart in front of their peers. Having a large classroom also kind of dissuades students because that increases that level of fear. Thank you all for saying the right things. Yes, it is absolutely usually a result of self-consciousness, but the good news is it is not because they are disengaged. There are about 7 answers that students most commonly refer to. One of them is that the course isn't interesting, but it wasn't complete disengagement. So knowing that, we know that we can control that much better than I think we give ourselves credit for. So I'm so sorry, this was a repeat. One of the most important parts that we also have all seen in a classroom environment is the consolidation of responsibility. This is another one of Jay's studies. He is insatiable. And what we know is that 5 to 7 students will make up 75 to 95% of the comments. Now, how often have you seen this norm appear? We notice kind of these habits and we do not take the time to disrupt them. Yes, thank you, Jennifer. So you all have the power to disrupt this. We want to disrupt this. We want to tell them, hey, on that first day, in addition to talking about civil attention, I also talk about the consolidation of responsibility. And yes, you will get some giggles. It is a very open way to kind of get some trust, kind of level the field, let them know that that's not something that we're willing to endure because it's not good for anyone, especially our students learning. So what we would ask, I wish we were in person, is how do we eliminate the consolidation of responsibility? So as you're at your desk, be thinking, wait a second, this isn't impossible. This is an easy strategy. So go ahead and fill in the chat box some of the things that you think may help us kind of just disrupt this. And again, this disruption needs to happen first day, 4th day, 10th day, and especially in an online environment, we're already struggling to capture students' attention. It is very easy to allow the consolidation of responsibility. I would say many of us have been relieved on a day when our motivation is low that we can kind of count on the consolidation of responsibility. So we want to address that and find ways to make sure students are participating. So on the first day also, one of the ways that we can help students know that this expectation is also going to be rewarded, discussion boards, absolutely, breaking students into smaller groups, 100%. So we let them kind of identify where they want to set their goal and how that's going to affect their grade. And so on my students' final exams, I have them rate themselves. So we talk about this probably on the third day or so, and then near the end, or you can remind them during the beginning, don't forget about your rate your participation scale. How are you doing? I want you to be able to get a 5 to help your grade in case you're right on that cusp. So you can see that we range from present but don't contribute. Number 1 and number 2 are kind of our civil participants. And number 5 is what we want to help drive our students to. We cannot assume that our students are going to land on number 5 by luck. This is our absolute responsibility as retention specialists during a pandemic to make sure that we are nudging our students to that number 5 slot. There are lots of ways to do this, and even small ways and older platforms, Mentimeter, Word Cloud. We can use bar graphs, directpoll.com. There are lots of little ways throughout your classroom to just use a very simple device to just check in with students and make sure that even if they have slipped, Kahoot, fantastic, that we get them back. So what if they still won't talk? If we know that disengagement is not a reason, then we know that them not talking means that we as instructors need to change our strategies. So what are some small ways? Another guru is Dr. Brad Gardner. And so some small ways that can be used at any point during the class are note cards. That could be the same as a chat box. How students are doing at the beginning of class, what questions do they have from the last course, a check-in at the midpoint, or at the end. Yes, the muddiest part. Oh my gosh, you're already ahead of me, Helene. You got this. The 1-minute paper, a fantastic way. We're going to discuss the ways that we kind of wrap up and help students make meaning at the end of a class. The 1-minute paper, again, useful beginning, middle, or end, especially during this. It can be in any format. It can be through Blackboard Collaborate. Any format that you're using online, this is helpful for as well. A cinquain is a 5-line poem. The first line has 1 word, so you give them the first word, and then they reflect for lines 2 through 5. So the second line has 2 words, the third line has 3 words, the fourth line has 4 words. So this is a great way to kind of let students be creative. It's actually kind of a format for helping kids write poetry, but it isn't elementary because it still requires some synthesis. So the second line might be 2 adjectives to describe the word that you gave for line 1. So just different ways to help students think about things that may otherwise just be kind of lulling in their minds. If you have group work, have them elect a spokesperson. Once again, looking at Jay Howard's research, if students are shy or they're worried about having, looking dumb in front of their classmates, we know that they won't. But there's always an extrovert or person willing to be a spokesperson in that group. So instead of having everybody report out, having them elect a spokesperson creates that trust and makes people feel more comfortable. A museum walk, this can be online, it's even more ideal in person. But if students have huge pieces of paper or they do something on the board to show how they interpreted a concept or how they worked something out or anything that you want, students can walk around the room and learn from what other students did to solve something. To take the museum walk one step further, you can even have kind of a curator or someone who is part of the museum who explains how that particular group worked out whatever it is that you have asked them. But keep in mind, silence does not equal apathy. So it just means we need to change whatever strategy that we're using at the time. Information and belongingness. This concept, both in sociology and teaching, is important because it's part of our lives every day. Why do we go to book club when we haven't read the book? We may go to a church or spiritual ritual even when we're not feeling very holy. Homophily is real. Homophily is that social association, that bond that we have, that birds of a feather. And so we crave that, especially now during a pandemic. And so helping students feel that in your classroom is absolutely critical. Creating and for kind of that sense of belongingness also helps students know that your opinion matters and your presence has value. In Flower Darby's work, which we're going to talk about, she feels it's critical to nudge the students who also just aren't responding. So if you have a student who hasn't logged in on day 3, it is critical to reach out to them and let them know, hey, I noticed that you haven't logged in yet. Are you having any trouble? In a very conversational way. We have got to be more authentic and conversational with our students to increase the sense of belongingness. If you are in an online setting, it is going to be more critical to let students know that their absence is noticed, and not because they're in trouble, but because you want them to succeed. You want them to get to that 5. So looking at information belongingness, if you're in a classroom setting, where you can be in person, learning students' names is critical. And you know what? If you need name tents to do that, that's okay, because you're still looking at the student and using their name, which we know psychologically is very powerful. They are not going to judge you for doing that. So having them write their first name and something about them on a name tent seems elementary. I've never had a student go, hated that. They like other people hearing their name and becoming part of a community. Arrive early and stay late if you can. I think we all know what this signals to students. You care, you want to be available to them. I think this concept of office hours is probably pretty archaic in our college setting, that a student's going to seek you out. I know that is the ideal setting, and it certainly helps students learn and get individual attention, but just knowing that they can talk to you about something in an informal way is critical. Discussing your hopes for them helps you become human for them. And I think explaining why you teach is something that they haven't usually considered, in addition to the last bullet, asking what they want to get out of the class. In many cases, there's where you're going to find some commonality in many cases. So explaining why you teach may even be some inspiration you had during a trip to Italy. It may be your book report or what you wrote about for your dissertation. That is of interest and humanizes you. So, and your willingness to say, you know what, you can affect where we go in this classroom setting because your curiosity can guide it. What we want to be sure, especially in the online setting, is that they know that you're a human. I think we all had that point in grade school where we thought our teachers were just some sort of ethereal being, and we all had that experience where we first saw a grade school teacher in, a grocery store or something, and we thought, what is she doing here? We've got to make sure they know we are here for them. So Darby Flowers, thank you again, CTE. This is just amazing that we had this opportunity to have this experience right when we needed it. Her study looks at what we know about online learners. So this is critical. First-time online learners need reassurance and tools to help with preparation. We know they started this in March, but I think all of us know that we were many of us were kind of just trying to get through the dark and not really looking at what our best formats were and how we were going to excel. We were trying to get by. So many of them, once again, are first-time online learners, with 42% being completely online for the entire semester. That is going to feel very different to them. And reassuring them that we're all kind of figuring this out as we go, and that if they hit blips, we're here to help. Online teaching also is likely to have a higher attrition rate. We say might because we haven't had a chance to measure it yet, but it is almost a guarantee. So if 42% of our undergraduates right now are going to be completely online, we have over 10,000 students who are at risk of a higher attrition rate. Thank you for being part of this today so that you can become a retention specialist, reaching out to them to let them know, I'm worried about the fact that you're more at risk. I'm here to make sure that if there's something I can do to change that, that's what I'm going to do. So they do not feel prepared. They are not prepared in many cases. And when we, in the Office of Academic Integrity, talked to students who had some cheating allegations, in many cases, they said, I had trouble with the format. I had trouble uploading my documents. So finally, I just grabbed something else and uploaded that one. It was a very easy solution, but they didn't reach out to the instructor. Why? We have got to make that an open, inviting environment. Also, in order to do well, our students need higher executive functions. Many of our 18-year-olds aren't there yet because their prefrontal cortex is still running for the finish line. So helping them overcome challenges, letting them know that you're there for that, and identifying when they need help and letting them know, I don't think you're stupid because you asked me for help, has to be how we open up our course. And students shouldn't have to teach themselves. We've got to be key in motivating them to stick with it. Darby also looks at what do we know about faculty. This is a fantastic Educause article about tech and teaching. 9% prefer to teach online, which leaves us with 91% don't. Well, we get to be the bigger person. It is up to us to make sure that as teachers, we identify why we became teachers. It is critical for us to embrace that, even in a different format. Our responsibility and the love that we have in choosing this vocation has not changed. So yes, even if we think online classes don't work, guess who has the power to change that? All of us. So we got this. And that, yes, I put ferns behind because it feels like we have no real life sense when we're online for an entire semester. So we've got to infuse that with oxygen. What are Darby flowers, which is the best name on earth? Recommendations, tip 1, begin your final assessment in week 1. So help them see the end goal. We all know after looking at a screen for so many weeks, it feels like it's just on and on and on. Let them know what the goal is and help them chart their progress toward that goal. So post a concept map for the final paper. If you feel like a concept map is beyond what you've ever done before, it isn't. Do a little Google and you will see it's actually quite easy to help them, and it's much easier than looking at a bunch of content in a written format on the screen. It's something that students can really visualize. Record a video talking through what they might do for a project. Seeing your face, seeing your intonations, seeing your expressions is going to make a difference. Also in that, I think our encouragement is going to be critical. Provide questions or question sets for the high stakes final. Help them practice in advance. And lastly, give lots of feedback. And what we have found and what Flower tells us is that timeliness is a student's number one piece of feedback that makes them think they are cared about in an online setting. In one of her surveys where she asked, how do you know if a student cares? Or I'm sorry, if an instructor cares in an online setting, they said, they answer my emails. This goes back to the isolation that they experience. If they are looking at their calendars and they have synchronous classes and asynchronous, and they've decided that on Tuesday from 5 to 7, they're going to work on the project for your class, and at 2 p.m. they send you an email with a question because they know they need it answered by 5, and they don't get it till the next day, they have lost that time to work on it. So yes, that may demand a little bit more of us, but that responsiveness helps them know, yes, we care. Tip number 2, design for persistence. If we know dropout is common, we can help them see the light at the end. Once again, a goals contract, which goes back to tip number 1 too, in designing for the end in mind. The goals contract helps them write out, what do they hope for in this class? Maybe that's just an A. Maybe it's a B+. Maybe it's, I want to be able to learn how to tie these concepts to real life because this is a career that I want. That still takes action steps. So help them, and you can have them do this in a video response, which I think would be fantastic. Identify a challenge they might encounter. So that challenge might be, I'm trying to balance these online classes, which take more time because I have to learn 5 different formats because I have 5 different instructors, with the fact that I have to work because a partner or someone in my family has lost their job due to the pandemic. Knowing that in advance, helping them identify that, helps you assist if they need help with those steps. So helping them identify the strategy to overcome that challenge, they have the responsibility to do that first. We all know that they're going to be more committed to that strategy if they're the ones who are coming up with it. But this helps students kind of structure their semester, creates agency, and if halfway through the semester you see that a student is struggling, we can go back to asking them, hey, was this part of the challenge that you thought you might encounter, and how can I help you kind of make those steps to get you through? Tip number 2, once again, helping students make connections. And one of the things we find is we're looking at 4 different researchers' literature, is that they kind of echo one another. Helping students make connection is something that we cover through flower work and later on. So novice students, we know, struggle in making the connections. So what he says is we've got to give them the hangers to organize their closet. They have this pile of clothes, and if we help them figure it out, they may be able to follow along a little bit better. I know that in some of the CTE's work, they have shown how a syllabus can be organized by module. So looking at what the topic is by module as they examine in Blackboard what you're going to cover, to organize their closet. So other ways, activating prior knowledge experience, asking them what they already know about the topic. Using an ungraded pre-assessment where there is no risk to them, you can identify where they have gaps, and they can identify where they have gaps in knowledge that they're about to attain. And use discussion questions. So helping them process the information is critical. Also, providing the framework, what's the roadmap, how do we actually get to the end, and giving pointed and complex questions to the reading. Maybe those prime them for what you're going to cover next time. Giving partial slides and encouraging note-taking during the video by giving them subheadings only allows them to engage with your work by having to fill in, and listening for certain keywords that you know are important. We want to balance the academic integrity component of this, but if you are changing this every single time, and on the first quiz you use some of those pointed and complex questions on that quiz, you're going to kind of show them how paying attention and utilizing the resources you're giving them to pull it together is helping in their learning. Tip number 3, the science of emotion. Emotion and cognition are linked. If they're enjoying it, if they feel like there is a connection, their cognitive function improves. So acknowledge that emotions are part of the learning environment. And this is where you sending a video at the beginning could be critical. So bring your passion to create the atmosphere. Let them know that you love this topic, that you love teaching, why you teach, what your favorite thing about teaching freshmen might be. So give them announcements. I think an announcement at the beginning of the week about what you're about to cover is great. Letting them know you're looking forward to class is great. Linking things to events that are happening, there is plenty of fodder, as we all know. And then designing for emotions, finding ways to create a welcome environment. If you give them kind of a teaser at the beginning of the week as to what you're going to cover, they are more invested because they know that you're paying attention and it's in real time. You're not just hitting go, the same thing that you did last semester. So those 10-second videos about what you're going to cover is fantastic. Plan things that are fun. Let them have exercises and breakout groups that also have a component of why, or letting them get to know each other in some fun way. I wish we had time to write this learning outcome, but we all, I think, can envision for ourselves what we feel our most successful students will be. Maybe they're students who can read widely and derive pleasure. Maybe they're students who are successful despite the odds during a pandemic when they have completely online courses. But I pin this on my wall to make sure that when I feel like, oh my gosh, this student is being particularly needy, come back to this, because whenever we do this in the live person session, what you as participants write is beautiful. Other quick hits, understanding yourself and your audience. So making sure you know if you are feeling uncomfortable with your format, we've got the whole summer to perfect it. Letting students know where you feel your vulnerabilities may be, that is absolutely fine. And then setting expectations in the first class, letting them know what your expectations are and how you're there to help if that doesn't occur. Many of these, again, are more in-person techniques, but can be used online as well. Using techniques that minimize disruption. If you know you have a large class and there are pockets of chatter, a seating chart is fantastic. We are all tempted to talk to the people who are right next to us about what is happening on Outlander if they're a good friend. We are not going to tell a stranger what's happening on Outlander. So keep in mind there are some geographic things that we can always do to assist that. Let students know that there are campus resources, and many of you, because you're taking part in this, I know, look to the Student Success Center, look to counseling and psychiatry for help. Just giving a warm handoff and helping a student make that connection, calling them, sending them the link can be everything. Also, group process for peer evaluations. We know how students roll their eyes when we do group work. One way that we're going to have to get them involved and speaking to each other is by asking for more group work. One of Flower Darby's suggestions is make sure that perhaps we have fewer assignments, but that they are more impactful and more meaningful. This is likely to take the form of group work. So in peer evaluations, you want to execute this by offering a form on the very first day that you introduce this project. And it is very objective, and each of them can fill one out. And in my class, it will say not, hey, was this person helpful, 1 to 5. One, how many appointments that you guys had together did they make? How many did you have total? So that nobody pressures somebody else into saying, hey, you know, I was really busy. Can you give me a good grade on that? That is 10% of their score. And it is based on objective measurements. So we are looking at what was that person's role in the group? Did they do the research? Did they put together the Prezi? What are those components so that it is not subjective and you know exactly what the student contributed and the other students don't feel guilty for saying, yeah, Everybody knows what the expectations are. Rubric, fantastic. Asking good questions. I know this seems crazy to have to put on here, but here's what we do as instructors. We ask questions that we have a prescribed answer for, right? See, I just did it. We want students to get to a certain place, and so we feel like if we ask a question, that will get them more engaged. This is the wrong way to do it, folks, and we've watched all of our instructors do it throughout the years, but we have to ask an open-ended question that gets them thinking that doesn't have a prescriptive answer. So, must be open-ended and must not be leading. So, if I ask the class, what are the tenets of the Carolinian Creed? Sure, I want to test their knowledge. I want them to get it right, but that's not really a question. It has a specific answer. So, let's make it one step better. Why should the university have a creed? Well, I mean, we know there's a good right answer to that, so perhaps that also has a right answer that's prescriptive, but it's also leading. So if I ask about the creed, the right question is, should a university have a creed? This takes some cognitive flexibility. You will think, oh, I'm doing just fine. It is hard to do this. So be thoughtful about the questions that you ask in advance. So looking at James Lang's work, also, he does fantastic work about the first and the last 5 minutes of class. I encourage you to look up much of his work. He is both the director of the Center for Teaching Excellence at Assumption College and a professor of English. And he probably has been writing about teaching and learning for probably longer than anyone that I've studied. So he looks at opening class with 4 to 5 questions. And by opening class, that can be that these are posted in advance to help students kind of guide their homework and their reading. That can be, you know, on the screen when they arrive. That can be on the board when they arrive. But this kind of helps students, as we said, make those same connections. So if the first question of the day is available, they know what the lecture is going to follow as far as that roadmap. So the example he gives is, what problem is the separation of powers designed to address? So now a student, as people are filtering in, are considering that. And then the last question is, what are the forces that have eroded that? They see exactly where you are headed. So, and at the end of class, they see what the relevance was. So you're showing that the class has a clear purpose. Other important strategies. Asking what we learned last time is critical. So this can be something students put in the chat box, but here's the important part. When we look at the testing effect and metacognition, the retrieval practice is critical. We have to help students practice remembering things. So what Dr. Lang says is the more time that students have to draw information, ideas, or skills from memory, the better they learn it. So if we ask at the beginning of class, what did we learn last time? Now know this, a student cannot be looking at a screen, at notes, at anything, because that is not retrieval. So if they are putting in the chat box, we learned this, what an instructor's duty would be then is to look at that, write on the board what they're saying out loud, and make sure that you're correcting it. So if there's something that's wrong, we want to go ahead and correct that so that we are helping them retrieve that for future tests. So this is a fantastic way to set up the day's material and assist their retrieval. So I'm going to show you what he also does, which is to help students learn how to learn. And just imagine if every freshman had an instructor who did this. He asked them right before their midterm, how did you study? And they put their name on it. So what he did at the end is he did a graph like this, and he put the average grade of the students who just wrote things. Again, he's an English instructor, like reviewed notes and reread the poems, which are pretty passive ways to study. So perhaps those students got a 69% average. And then the students who wrote much more higher cognitive functioning strategies, like the ones on the right, perhaps got a 91. So he showed students the differences without saying you did well and you did poorly. And then going back to his last 5-minute strategy, the last 5 minutes before the next test, he brought this slide up again to say how you're studying and how you're learning is important. I want to help you do your best at that. Here are some additional strategies. Large classroom strategies, these actually work everywhere, but in the years I've done this certificate, some instructors said, hey, can you point us to some specific strategies toward the large classroom? And yes, the minute paper, once again, valuable in any setting, and helps students know that you're reviewing individuals' work. So if you do the minute paper, this is your template. This is what Helena had alluded to earlier. What's the most important thing you learned today? The crazy part about the second question is much more complex than it looks when we just take it on its face. What question still remains? This gets to a concept, the illusion of fluency. And with the illusion of fluency, we believe, and we all do this, that we've obtained mastery over something that we have not. So by asking this, and many of us have done this, where I think I understand something, and then I try to explain it to my partner, and I'm like, I really don't quite have this. So it helps students identify, where does the confusion and comprehension still lie? These two questions, if this is what you use the template every single time, will take you where you need to go. Other large classroom strategies, obviously, and this is a Brad Gardner recommendation as well, breaking up the course into 20 to 30-minute components. This also harkens back to KOLB'S experiential learning process. So 20 minutes of having them solve something, maybe it's 15, that's absolutely fine. But I think one of the main takeaways of the slide is having a lecture flies in the face of this. If you are lecturing from beginning to end, the things that help students remember, the things that help them engage, the things that help them learn are not being utilized. This naive task is not unlike what we talked about with the canary on the scale. What is something that they have to build a bridge? What are the things that you think are going to help them kind of prime themselves? How do students learn from each other in trying to figure it out? How do they find their own meaning? Also, the quiz. This is a super quick way to do, but what it does is it goes back to that metacognitive process of helping students retrieve. So giving a quiz at the very beginning, having them complete it before, and then present the material, then they've got to be able to fill it in as they go because they remember what they were having a trouble with. This is a very quick slide, but again, quick hits. Other things, giving choices. The more we can help a student kind of find their own meaning and explore their own curiosities, the more that learning is going to stick. So if it is possible in your course to assign kind of a learning menu, so you're going to have static core assignments. So maybe 60% of the points out of 100 are the static core things that you need for them to learn. But maybe then menu 2 is they can get 20 more points for reviewing a film and writing about it. They can get 10 more points for reviewing 5 articles as long as you've approved those articles, or you give them a list in advance if you don't have time. It is fantastic. Or a project that you do might be, in my class we do, what's a historical significant event at USC? You can change it to a significant historical event of the Industrial Revolution, whatever happens to fit your course. But the only instructions were, I want you to cover the topic as long as you, 1, outline the precipitous events, 2, cover the events and its people, tell me about the event, and 3, what was the impact of the event on the university or on economics, on industry, immediately and in the long term. Now students can find what interests them and pursue it. And here's a little secret. Makes it far more interesting for you to grade all different topics and learn in the process. Other tips we've discussed, explaining the why. And this also harkens back to James Lang's work. And the body of work that he charts in Small Changes in Teaching, the last 5 minutes. He has the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes, but helping students build connection. So perhaps in the last 5 minutes, on a Friday, you tell students you can leave when you've identified 3 ways, 5 ways in which the material appears in context outside of the classroom. Or how does what we have learned this week kind of guide you closer toward that final project? So if Flower Darby says, you know what, help them understand the roadmap to the final project. These are different people who study the same things going, these techniques work. Other pro tips, always prioritizing the discussion, 15-minute spurts. 2 active learning strategies is critical. And this is a little bit of a challenge for us as we approach planning each class session, but 2 active learning strategies are critical to help students solidify that. And if you're making time for that reflection and connection, students are going to feel like they have purpose. Other classroom environment options. This is getting us a little bit into what we're going to discuss on the I'm flying through because I was so worried we wouldn't have enough time. But in the classroom environment, sometimes we have people who are so loquacious that it becomes a distraction. So this slide is kind of just a back pocket reference for you, because what we never want to do in the classroom environment, as we discussed from Dr. Howard's work, is do anything but build trust and make it a safe place for participation. If we have a person, and you all have had them, that is too dominant, we don't want to embarrass that person. We want to preserve their dignity as best as we possibly can. So it is very delicate to address that situation. Most importantly, I think having a conversation with them aside, because in most of the cases that we have, students have no idea how they're being perceived by other students. You can see it because in some cases, students will roll their eyes at that student and we're like, oh my gosh, we have lost kind of the ability for this student, if they do have something important to say, to get that message across. So here are some ways to kind of redirect that dominant speaker in a way that preserves their dignity, but doesn't disrupt your ability to get through the material that you need to get to. So what do others think? And again, if we revisit civil attention and the fact that you expect most students to speak because we expect to try to learn in this classroom, then the other students shouldn't just give in to the fact that the consolidation of responsibility has now effectively gone to less than 5 to 7%, but 1% of your class, which is this particular person. The other, I think, real challenge we can have in a classroom is redirecting the speaker who's going down the wrong path. Again, usually oblivious. We want to make sure that we don't embarrass them from this, but we do not want them to continue to go down the wrong path as students are looking at each other with side eyes. So ask them to talk about how they got to that particular conclusion, or let them know, okay, that's a tempting path because maybe it's just one we're not familiar with. Well, I'm going to steer us back to this main point for time's sake. Feel free to ask that person via email if they can just meet with you right after class for just a few minutes, assuring them that they are not in trouble. I made the mistake one time of asking a student the same thing, and she was so anxious during the whole class that she says, I don't know what just happened that whole class because I was so worried about what I had done wrong or that I was in trouble that you were going to kick me out. Something has gone wrong if we have somehow gotten them to that point. So let them know, hey, we want to talk about kind of our classroom environment and how we can improve that, because they are part of that. Again, we are not stuck with the specific sociological kind of stagnant environment. Letting students know they are more a part of that, or as much as you. Also, Vanderbilt Center for Teaching Excellence also does another great slide on encouraging behavior in large classrooms. Always, always, always defining expectations at the outset. And as we said, that's verbally and in writing on your syllabus, and letting students know that, if we decide that we need to change that or amend the syllabus or what the rules are, that we can do that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in session 4. Decreasing anonymity is critical, especially in our online environment. Letting students know that you notice them, calling them by name, even if it's in a chat, sending something to them saying that this particular paper showed exceptional work. I like to write to my students when we've all kind of gotten into the hum when you're reading a paper or a set of papers, and by number 16 you're like, ooh. And then you come across this jewel. In that moment, reach out to that student and say, this is the best one I've read yet. Who cares if it's the third one? They don't know. We don't know. If it's the best one you've read, how great does that feel for a student to just get that quick message that takes you 24 seconds? Encouraging active learning, letting them know it's important to you. And examine your own behavior and seek feedback at a midpoint. So when we have sought feedback before, and in many studies, students typically say, you know what, I don't really appreciate a student or an instructor that doesn't seem to care. They are confusing, they don't answer emails. These are very, very basic. And so in contrast, what I encourage you to do is use a kind of learning agreement, a social contract on the first or second day. And so here are the 3 units in that. What are the expectations? We do this on huge white paper around the room of the student to the instructor, of the instructor to the student, and student to student. Breaking them up into groups. You can have 3 groups, you can have 6 groups, you can have 18 groups. Let them come up with that. Put what those expectations are. This may feel like a risk. In doing this for 20 years, they have never put on the board that has students to instructor anything but what we can absolutely manage. It's get to know us, treat us like adults, grade fairly, return our papers on time, all things that should not make anyone go, huh? They're things that we want to do anyway. And then when we look at them and say, I absolutely commit to these, Fantastic. For instructors to students, we might put, I want you to take some risks. I want you to think in ways you haven't thought before. I want you to come prepared. You are setting that expectation in a very authentic way. And having the student to student component is phenomenal because students care more, dare I say, about what each other think than they do about what you think. Maybe I've got that wrong. But that is a powerful tool for them to feel like, okay, this is what people expect of me. So if I am outside of those lines, if you have to address with that student being outside of those lines, you have a kind of peer policing way to do that, where you can say, I'm going back to this because I took a photo on my phone, or it's in, you know, that day's kind of capture. And here's what we talked about. Tell me how you feel these behaviors are meeting this expectation or are not. Again, the more times that we have to address a student's behavior without it feeling subjective, being able to use an objective measure like what the syllabus statement was, what there said was an expectation, is 100% a way to make sure the student does not feel like you are attacking them, because it is going to feel like an attack just for having to have this conversation to start with. We are probably going to, I'm going to fly through this so we can get to enough time for some questions. We will readdress much of this in session 4, and how to follow up. For cell phones, what we find is that many of our instructors feel like cell phones detract from that sense of community in the classroom, and they absolutely do. And so we will try to post a fantastic resource from Pete Volkholder, and he did an article called Helping Students Make the Right Call on Cell Phones through Magna Publications. And what he talks about, he gives a lot of kind of snippets to use in a syllabus, is that if you are using a cell phone in a classroom, it is a distraction. So all cognitive behavior scientists will agree that electronic devices erode your ability to concentrate. So if you are in a difficult course like chemistry or calculus, if you are on your phone, you are not going to be able to have the same level of cognitive functioning. Therefore, you're wasting your time and your money to be in this course if that happens. So knowing that students also, in many cases, find themselves addicted to their phone, letting the classroom be the oasis just for the 50 minutes. Letting them know you want them to learn as much as possible, and we all know that they cannot learn in the same way if they're using a phone, keeps it from being quite as punitive a feel. And so we will make sure that if the CTE doesn't already have that in the library, that we get that to you, because I think it's a very non-confrontational way that echoes your sentiment that you want students to be able to learn as much as possible and gain time together, or gain the material that you have in your time together when their phone will always be there. This classroom management solutions table, I think in the conversion, I can't quite access it, but this is a fantastic solutions table that kind of gives you a grid of if this is the type of behavior, and again, we'll probably have a chance to cover this more in session 4. If you have this type of behavior, this is typically what's at the root of that behavior, and this is an option for how to address it. How to ban cell phones in virtual space is going to be a huge complication. I'm praying that people are writing on that right now, because having our cameras on is ideal, but that's going to be dependent on the size of our classrooms. So I think we're going to continue. And this is completely putting the CTE on the spot, which is rude. But as I think we're all kind of progressing through this and figuring out how to do that, I know that the CTE thus far since March has been our go-to on how to address new challenges that we realize that we've got to be able to address.